Um, that ripples was incredible. So what I'm going to follow up with next is not even remotely connected to that. It's me complaining about the freaking noise outside, so I can't be out there. I'm right next to an Air Force base, and every day they're sitting around flying F-35s and F-15 fighter jets, which are literally millions of dollars an hour to fly. It's like, anyhow, it's just this big, obnoxious, ridiculous waste that keeps reminding me why we're on this journey. Is like, why is humanity doing that? No one's enjoying this air pollution from the engines themselves, and two, I can't even have a conversation outside, and this is for hundreds of thousands of people living around here, so it's weird.
Where
I'm venting that. And
Are you near Denver? Are you near
not anymore. We're in just north of Salt Lake, around Ogden in Utah. So this is where my folks live. I'm back at their place, and this is where CC is feeling most grounded to bring new life into the world. So we came back here because we were just really ungrounded in the RV and traveling to Denver. Because here every day we go for a hike, we go up and drink spring water, and we go check out a different canyon, and we spend time like outside connecting with nature. But the whole time we were at East Denver and on the RV, like we didn't do any of that. We had envisioned that we would do that. We told ourselves we would when we left, but then we didn't. So rather than pretending to make it happen, we just came back here. Anyhow, that's a little bit about my story, and I don't want to take too much time talking about that. So I wanted to pass it back to Jamaica. You were sharing about ripples and having this beautiful, I guess, vision that I was holding as you were sharing it with me. But anyhow, I wanted to pass it back to you to kind of reground that space and kick this.
I want to acknowledge the tension, Reiki. Thank you for sharing. And I'm going to pass it to Kaiti actually to check in. I had my soapbox moment.
Yeah, mine's much less of an eloquent response too. My theme for this week on Monday, which surprised me, was kind of chaotic good. And I think I've just been finding little points of disruption all week, which has been exciting. Just kind of looking at what we can turn on its head to make whatever we have exponential.
Chaotic good. So I think you guys are actually both on the same ripple here, because tossing ripples into water is chaotic.
I'm just throwing some rocks.
Well, and that's the thing, when you're throwing rocks, one, I don't know how good of a throw anyone is. So we're never hitting the target we think we're going to aim for anyway, at least most of the time. And two, what happens when the ripples connect with each other is like almost impossible to predict. So we'd actually have like really no idea what impact we're having as we're having an impact. So like trying to have impact is also kind of a weird goal too, because when you're trying to have impact, it's like trying to throw a bigger rock so you can make a bigger ripple when you have no idea what those ripples are going to do anyway. So I think that's kind of where it comes back to like what space we're acting from, which is really alive for me these days, because I am also, to reflect what you're saying, Jamaica, where it feels like there's a lot of change happening. There is, but some of that change is coming from a reactive state as, nation states are getting more and more aggressive. Now it's becoming like, oh, no, we need to fight. We need to respond. We need to like take action, and go out there and defend liberty and all these, things. And that's throwing a bigger rock that's causing more, chaos and problems, and is actually fueling our other meta crises like degeneration. Because now we're out there, even just the lamest example in Canada of them having a convoy protest. They're sitting there spewing more emissions into the air for less of a reason in order to have the protest. So it's like our actions to, fight against the system are being more degenerative, which is like causing it so we can't actually better address the real meta problem, which is degeneration and killing our planet. So it's like, we are throwing a lot of rocks, but now maybe it's a moment to throw less rocks and think about what rocks we're throwing, and maybe to decide if there's rocks, we shouldn't be throwing rocks at all.
Or more powerfully, right, is to become the ripples and recognize there's already, like, I feel like we have been throwing certain rocks in that pond for a while. And you're right, there's other rocks, if we're going to stay with that metaphor, like other disruptions. And I feel more and more compelled to like ride the subtlety of like, there's like the butterfly effect, like not underestimate our little small pebbles with these giant boulders, but like actually become the ripples. It's like focus less on the disruptive forces and become these ripples that exponentiate that. Like, if I'm going to be the ripple, what am I going to touch with that? And who am I going to impact? And how am I going to amplify? And that right now,
Oh no.
Rose.
I was just gonna say, I love. Oh, we
That's
lost
okay. My
you when you
internet.
got
Rose at such a
here.
good moment. You were
It was like, So we lost you when you went closer. I don't know if you remember that moment.
Yeah, just that these ripples, there's clearly the collective consciousness is experiencing the radical interconnectedness of these disruptions. And so when things happen on the other side of the world, you can feel the impact somatically of the stress response it creates as more and more of these sort of compounding triggers of stress hit the field. And it's almost like this courageous, like bold, fierce fucking act to decide to put compassion in the field and to put love in the field and to put cooperation in the field and like be, if there's going to be ripples, like it's almost like transmute those ripples that are going out and be an amplifier of ripples for change. And I just, there's something right now about it's time, the conditions are right and it's time to become more visible. Like this mycelial web, I almost feel like I wish we were a little more strengthened. I wish we were a little more coordinated, and I still feel calculated and strategic to get more clearly like, you know, integrated as like this mycelial system before we emerge. But I also know that we might just have to go and hit right timing strategically with the best of what we have and kind of on the fly as the wheels are moving, like keep tightening up this, like these levers of systems transformation, because the world is only going to keep exponentiating those ripples. And if we don't meet that with a narrative shift and a calculated like movement that sparks change, I think that we're going to find ourselves like there's a point in which you just have to take the leap and not set everything up and not have everything. You're going to learn this because you're about to be a dad. You'll never be fully ready for what you're about to enter into. You just have to go, well, here I am. It's happening. I'm going to take the best of what I have so far, make the most of it, and muddle my way through something that I can't even understand how it's going to change me, but I know it'll change me. And that's how I feel like we just have to trust ourselves and spend this year feels like a really radical moment to get as integrated as we can, because I don't feel like the world can wait for what we bring. And it can't wait to have this narrative shift. And it can't wait to have this systems transformation. It's changing either way. But if we aren't stepping in to help guide and wield and midwife that change, then it's going to change in the direction of the biggest fucking splash in the pond and not be like wisely like alchemy, you know, like the alchemy of changing what happens with those ripples so they don't become distorted, but they become super harnessed and amplified in a direct.
I have a collection of screenshots of when she freezes like this because it's always in the best.
I know. Why is that the case?
I almost got one for my collection. I was too slow.
Well, I think what happened was you were so much
you.
flow and you're channeling so much energy that when it was trying to articulate that energy and put it into a digital format, it just broke. So you broke the internet.
And that's the thing. I feel rabble-rousy. I feel bold and emboldened and rabble-rousy to like, you know, like there's a point in which you
Jamaica, get better internet. That is my desire for you in the next moment of your life.
Better satellites, I guess.
That's all. Just it's time.
I'm with you. Yes.
I don't want to dominate our call with my revolutionary, my like impassioned like preaching to the choir, because I know you guys know, but I guess I'll bring it and ask you, Reiki, something that came up for us. It was so great to be on that call the other day. Such a great group of nerds. That's where Katie and I are like, yay, our nerd people. This is so great. We love the things we love. And I guess one thing I wondered, and then I welcome whatever your agenda was, and Katie, if you have thoughts, but I was sort of feeling into what's our highest leverage, right alignment? How do you imagine kind of our particular role, knowing us in the circle, and kind of what you're trying to weave together? I think it'd be great just to like continue to clarify how you see us best fitting and serving, and kind of what we bring to that circle that you want us to harness. I guess it would be great. And then whatever else you had on the agenda, and Katie, whatever else you wanted to add.
So I'm going to respond to your question by reflecting to the statement that you're just sharing. And that's to be the ripple. So I think that's kind of it's almost a continuation from be the change you wish to see, is like being the change is being the rock. Mm-hmm. While what you're, I think, suggesting is that next paradigm shift we have to understand, which is don't be the rock that has the impact, but be the ripple that is the impact. So it's kind of saying, okay, let's take more direct action to be in the new world that we're creating rather than just talking about it, which I think we've been doing a long time. Meaning that's like, one example is the villages we're setting up. Like, let's get together, let's build our village, let's set up what, citizen councils look like on a village scale, how we can be really practical on regenerating our environment, why our tools actually help us do that, why it's way more beautiful and fun and fulfilling to actually meet all of our human needs that have been going unmet because we don't even talk about them. But if we actually set up a community that says, hey, these are our human needs, we need love and connection and purpose and understanding and meaning and all of these other things that human needs that just our culture doesn't even quantify or even attempt to try to address. Like, obviously we're not meeting them then. What does that look like when we build that culture and get really practical about it? I'm getting real here because I'm about to be a father, as you mentioned, and I want them to be raised in this world because they're the ones that are creating the new reality. We're kind of stewarding it and building the bridge and providing the conditions and spaces for them. But really, it's the ideas that are going to come from the 7-year-olds, the 14-year-olds, the current rebels, the little kids of the world that are getting to the point where they're like, I am a god. They're understanding that we're gods, and they don't understand the current system. So they're rebelling. So those kids are the ones that actually know what the future civilization looks like. They know it within themselves, but they aren't having the spaces in order to interact and, create that reality for themselves. So I think this is where we're at. If we're getting really practical, we need to move into villages, empower the next generation to build new realities, and then, build the tools that support this, transition, and getting really practical about regeneration. So that's kind of where I'm at. So I'm saying, yes, fully agree with you. What we do to unfold that is we need to live in that, the future civilization. And what does that look like to me? When I'm creating with people, I want to get out of the bullshit capitalistic world that we had before, where we have our agenda that we're trying to sell to another person, and they have their agenda that they're trying to sell, and we're trying to intermediate an agreement to see if we can sell each other our agreements and blah. It's so superficial. I would much rather our interactions be that we get together, we try to align on the highest purpose of what we're trying to create into the world. And then we let conversations unflow and kind of guide us naturally on how we ought to, interact and engage and create further. So we create the conditions for more creativity to manifest. And we just keep stepping into that and then letting that guide every next step. And it's hard because we don't get to set timelines, and it's a little bit different because it does seem like we're making less progress at the beginning. And I found that with groups where it gets this annoying feeling because it's like, nope, we need a target and we need to identify that. And then we need to reach that target. But what I've found is that when we keep doing that with groups, the targets that we're setting, they're not really the next step that we need to be taking together anyway. So we're almost just being way more efficient at running around in circles rather than actually progressing and moving forward and accomplishing what we're trying to accomplish. So that's where I'm at in my stage in my journey, is I'm actually trying to slow down and stop and just, press the brakes on a lot of things, because I've been feeling like I've been running in 100 directions, like at full speed for the last 7 years. And now I'm like, all right, pause, reflect. Let's really ground with the change makers that have been doing this for the last while and just slow down and find out, okay, what collectively is the next best way to become the ripple? I love that. Let's shift it. Let's stop throwing rocks and having that energy tossing it, and instead embody that change. And what does that actually look like? So I love that inspiration. I'm just going to say a full-bodied yes to, exploring that further with the two wonderful humans in front of me right now. You guys are awesome. And with all that being said, I actually want to pass it to Caitlin because I think she's holding on to a whole lot of great stuff. So Caitlin, if I can.
Yeah, I mean, to keep it in the somewhat abstract, I think that reflecting on what both of you shared, to work a little bit backwards, I have a lot of different reflections, but first I was thinking about sort of this fixation that we see all around us on impetus, right? Like action as being the important thing, or the how or the tool. When I think more care needs and reflection needs to go into really that what. You see it in technology so prevalently. So I'm just sort of using that example. But, for example, like, we both were very early in blockchain and saw all of this promise. And then when the tool became the fixation, it was then just leverage, like it lost its power in a way, because then it was just leveraged to perpetuate existing systems. Likewise, we're hearing that, now we're seeing so much of that around NFTs, where people are like, how can I best make an NFT? And it's like, well, but why? What type of value exchange or what type of incentive are you looking to progress? And I think that there's a lot of safety in these layers of abstraction or these containers, because we get to just keep in motion without questioning the why. And
I want to respond just quick to that. This is so brilliant. And I think it's what capitalism did to our brains is it had us product focus. Because communication is about communicating a product and how this product serves you and this product does, rather than the concept behind the product of why did we build that product? Is this product serving humanity? Well, yeah. So I think that's why it did become about Bitcoin rather than revolution. What drawed me to Bitcoin was revolution, building a new world. We can do that. But then we got focused on that one tool rather than the concept of creating something different. Mm-hmm. That was deep, and it really connected with me, and I wanted to just reflect. So thank you. Back to you.
Yeah. So that's just something that I've been reflecting on a lot, and how can we create the permission to think, because there's safety in following these particular examples, and we do want to be inclusive as we progress. And to the other end of that pole, something that I'm also reluctant about is this temptation to just kind of run off and build and show what's possible in parallel in a way that doesn't kind of pull up the ladder for those that are otherwise going to be left behind, because it's also not necessarily people's fault or intention that they're getting sort of pulled into this productization. And so I feel also responsibility to ensure that we're kind of relatable and building a bridge, and even the language we use when we're building around these new paradigms, because otherwise I fear that we'll start recreating the same dynamics in parallel, because until we go through the labor of that transformation and those difficult conversations, then we won't be equipped to kind of be different on that other side. And so that's been one of my big reflections from just a building and responding kind of perspective, just kind of reflecting on our how. And then on the ripples, I think a lot about the unconscious ripples. I think on one hand, I've put a lot of intent around how can we be better at responding rather than always needing to do or act or react. But to the other end of that extreme as well, most of the biases, most of the extraction that we see happening today through, for example, modern capitalism, it's not because people wake up one day and say, I feel like being evil today. Like, I feel like, perpetuating wealth inequities. A lot of it's like some random middle manager who's like, my kid is sick and I need a little bit more money. And so it's probably not that bad if I like fudge this one number. It's all of these tiny little kind of nudges that then create this big swell. And I find that also really hopeful, because if something as insidious and entrenched as our current economic system can be so invisible, then our revolution can be invisible too, if we can just start to shift those incentives. And so I've become far less interested in talking about what we're going to do and just doing it, and kind of being, and maybe being that silent kind of majority in a way that starts to kind of move those ripples in response, but also being aware of where we're responding, I guess, because there's sort of that balance, right? Like, where are we unconsciously just kind of responding to stimuli that are biasing us too?
I want to add a layer into that, only to say that to affirm what you've just said, Katie, and also to add something that feels really important for me is the pattern process and sort of protocols. That layer right now, I'll send it to you, Reiki, but I just sort of launched a series that I'm doing on social ecologies as living systems and pattern matching living systems to how we design. And so if we're looking at self-organizing, coordinated, diverse, distributed, yet reciprocal, like these living systems patterns, if we're designing with that intent in mind to change the pattern underneath how we do what we do, and then outline the process of that alignment to a new pattern, to a regenerative pattern and paradigm, and that we become like template builders that are experimenting as a laboratory by doing, applying, iterating, learning, and doing again, and have that be the intent versus sort of like, as you're saying, like just drive a thing, meet a goal, put the new product to market, make the capital, like those things that drive, I think in some ways I want to be, not because they aren't creating a paradigm, but I want to make sure that if we're really creating a paradigm, it's based on fundamental like foundation of how we do what we do is even more important than what we do. That change in how we do what we do. So this like integration of why I was so celebrating your rhythmic cycles of like, we align ourselves with nature. We look to those patterns of how this very complex, adaptive, dynamic world works, align ourselves, become it, model it, display it, practice it, embody it, and have that be actually the most impactful thing we could be doing is learning together how to become like a living system that's integrated and coordinated and distributed and mutual and reciprocal and all these key tenets. And to me, if we can't do that, if we're just recreating a pattern of hustle culture or the next new thing and innovation and kind of like onwards and onwards, and we aren't actually changing the like fundamental paradigm shift underneath how we do what we do is everything. And even almost more than why, the why is really important, but the how at this stage feels like, okay, we know we need to change it, but how do we do that and embody it in how we design, how we collaborate, how we implement, how we experiment, innovate, learn, etc., and make sure that we're following that pattern match, because otherwise, to me, we don't mean to, but we're so integrated and embedded in a system that wants to perpetuate itself that we have to be like super like vigilant to where that pattern even implicitly like starts to recreate itself, because it's everything we know and we're dismantling our own colonization. And so that diligence to going checking ourselves and having a process to check ourselves and check each other with love, with like care of like, we are allies, so let's help each other on like dismantle ourselves from this extractive system and reforge ourselves as part of a living system. Can we help each other in that? Can we put a process around that so that we have the ability to like be that together, name it where we see it coming up, give reflection in healthy ways that allow for like tension to turn into learning? Can we like be allies in like pattern shifting? And then whatever we build on top of that, even if it's slower in the beginning and foundational work and culture, sort of social building work, to me, anything we build then on top of that, fucking exponentiate. we'll be way more efficient anyway. We'll be way more productive, quite frankly, because we're pattern matching to something that gets us working as a system together. And that to me is the unique experiment that I'm really hoping to start playing out with people and really starting to practice and learn how to do that. And then anything we do on top of that, golden. I trust it. Like I trust what we'll build from that we'll have the kind of ripples we want. It'll be sticky. It'll take hold. But if we don't do that, I'm afraid we'll just be spinning wheels in a time where we don't have time to spin wheels. But we need to be experimental, and we need to go slow to go fast. We need to be thoughtful and calculated and diligent. And like that is tricky in a moment of urgency. But I trust if we do that in the beginning, we can actually go exponentially. Really, that's right. Yeah. So that's the last piece I would add to my hope for what we're up to.
I want to give you a hug. I mean, I'm doing it. Do you feel it?
I feel it. I'm giving it back.
That was just, yeah, that's a full-bodied fuck yes to me for all of that. So now I just want to build into it. So there's two things. One, I want to talk theoretical again, apocalypse. One definition of the apocalypse is what was once hidden is now revealed. It's the period of when things that were once invisible and secret are now being revealed. And that's from sacred societies and the information they're holding on to, down to what was once hidden, the economic system. We once thought we were fish in water, but now we're realizing we are gods. We are the creators of these systems. So this is the real paradigm shift we're going through right now is we are not just agents and users within a system. We are the creators of the system. And everything starts shifting at that point. Like when we're talking about language, stop calling ourselves users. Do you want to be used? No, you don't want to be used. Stop calling other users, because all the systems we're creating right now are going to act on you and act on us. So when we're thinking of incentives, how do you want to be incentivized? We're thinking like, how do I incentivize other people to do something? It's like, such a broken model, because the whole thing then is about, manipulation and exploitation, and how do we take advantage of each other? And why is that what we're doing in our system? When instead we could be thinking, how do we best design systems that best help us flourish? Okay, then what do we do? What algorithms do we want? What protocols do we want? How are we tweaking them? Now incentive structures, we aren't having this existential debate between intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. That's only a problem when you're being extrinsically motivated outside of yourself. Once it's internal that you're designing your extrinsic motivators, now it is intrinsic motivation. And we don't have this divide anymore, because we're the creators of the systems we're creating and being acted on. So then that's when we start stepping into being gods. And then understanding that we are gods, then we ask the question, what do we create together? And I think this is the next step that we're all wanting to take on a movement, is let's come together in groups, literal physical villages and communities, where we say we are gods. What are we creating together? What does our new economic system and civilization look like that's best going to meet all of our needs? Maybe that means we grow food together because that's the best way to meet food. Maybe it means we're going to build airplanes because that's the best way to achieve our existential purpose. Like whatever it is, we still need to be asking the question, what is our existential purpose and what's the best way to achieve that together? If we're not asking that collectively, then what are we even doing? So I think that's kind of the next step I would love to take, is like literal physical village that we get together that's got capacity for 144 people. Have 144 individuals representing different pieces of this more, regenerative renaissance that we're putting together right now, physically show up. The first month, we're going to go through a process of deconstructing our old identities, letting go of this piece we're holding on to, because we're letting all that go. And we need to do that. So the first month is about letting go. There's fasting, and there's a kind of a rites of passage recreated, because we desperately need this in society. And this is kind of that like actual stake in the ground moment. We are changing. This is different. So the first month is that before we introduce ourselves. And then the second month is, okay, we found our highest purpose. That was the first month. What is your purpose? What's your passion? What are you really here to do? What are you really here to do? Is that your current business? Probably not, maybe not. I don't know, who knows? But we ask that question first. You find out what your role is, and then you bring that role to the collective. And then the second month is about identifying all the different roles we have and what, our collective potential is. Because then the third month is what we do with that. And this is then when we actually start the mapping. So rather than the mapping coming first, where we get together and we start mapping what we're currently doing, we first, find that You get it. Okay, pause.
Yeah, and I think the
Okay.
quality of relationships that sparks is, while it's delicate to be intimate, it can be a little edgy, professional or systems changers. I notice myself as somebody who's an ally of this and a promoter of this, watching myself feel edgy in fields, because we're asking people to actually like drop the like, this is who I am and what I do for a minute, and the definition around that, to like be authentic about like, dude, this is hard, or like, this is my edge, or like, this is what I'm trying to work through, or this is what I want that's not expressing itself through me. I think that builds a quality of field of intimacy and truth and authenticity that then you can start dismantling and remantling something that we just skip over all the fucking time. And I'm complicit in that. We skip over it because we don't think people are ready, or because it doesn't seem as professional or savvy, or because it feels edgy to take that to people. But I feel radically disruptive, and Kaiti is such an ally for me in that, to be like, we need to approach this from a different way to disrupt the status quo, even in these circles of transformation. Yeah, Kaiti, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so the one sort of existential reflection that came up in what you were sharing, Reiki, and that ties into what Jamaica said, two things. One, all we are is who we are within a particular context, right? There is no essential. Is there an essential me-ness without that context? I would argue no. And so we kind of are our how within whatever context we find ourselves in. And so that sort of village building is sort of creating a whole new identity for everyone within that context by definition. And I think that's crucial, because that purpose, that answer would probably be different in that context than it would be in other contexts. And so that
I love that breakthrough, because then the context is so important, i.e. why it's necessary, and it's the opportunity. And there's so many beautiful things of doing this in a regenerative village, where we're showcasing what that new civilization looks like, and we're living it there. Because I think this is the second stage of what we could be doing together. Is the first one is a portal for setting up more. Because then anyone else is like, yep, I want to be in that new civilization too. You're like, great, apply for this next cohort. And then we're going to pair groups of 144 people together. We're going to get better at it. Maybe we do human design beforehand, or all the different ones, and we understand the archetypes that come together to make a holistic community, and we know how to start grouping people together. This is kind of the ongoing work that can happen. But then the groups come together, and the first gift of the first village is helping other groups go through this process too. So then that's part of our gift to the world, is bringing them to a village, showcasing what a new village could look like, a new way of living, a new way of meeting our needs, identifying who we are, all of this, putting it into a package. And then that's where our tools we're building come in handy. Now we're building tools that help coordinate that, help finance that, help scale that effort, help make it more tangible, like those. And then we're building tools from that space. But if we keep building tools from any other space, they're stupid tools. Let's get real.
Well,
Once we get in that space and we're building tools from that space to help spread that space, then the tools start making sense. Sorry, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, to that end, that was sort of what I was going to get into, which is that as a fundamental design principle as well, it's like, frankly, it doesn't matter what we build. I mean, it does and it doesn't. The what of what we build the first time. As a design principle, to me, that's often can and should be arbitrary, because I think part of what we're lacking is that permission to be wrong, and that knowledge that we're probably wrong most of the time. And so I have grown less and less concerned over time with designing for the specific content or designing for the specific experience, and more so saying that the first thing we need to design is the process for decision making to change when we are inevitably wrong. And when you then remove that fear of being wrong from all of the inhabitants of that particular context, then you're taking away the power that a lot of sort of existing systems have, because we've been sort of trained to be held back by that fear of being wrong. And so what does it look like to plan a series of mistakes, right? And then to learn how to feel our way through them, because once we can do that, we can do anything.
twin girl, what you got? And to grow our capacity to synchronize collectively. There's that piece about, again, the process, the pattern matching of like the how you create synarchy, informing, yes, what do you want to do, but how do you create synarchy? How do you create these? And you're all about it with the social governance systems, the modeling of it, and the processes. You have that framework laid out in those architectures, as do, you know, other people to contribute to that, but taking a group into the livingness of doing it, so that not sort of only in our writing. And I know, again, you've been experimenting that with SEEDS and Hypha, and I think it's the continuation of the experiment itself, the laboratory, as Kaiti's named. We're like, you're how do you create synarchies? Like, how do you create collectives that can move in common? Like, how do you build a commons again that's aligned with the principles of nature, that inform us about how we do everything we do as a foundation? And then what do you want to build on that, with that, through that? I don't think we take enough time with it. I think we want to do the thing, again, that sense of urgency. So I wonder how to be experimental even within this civics group, and kind of be like, okay, we're going to be a little radical here. You know, like, we're going to go back to like, let's align ourselves rhythmically, you know, let's learn together how to be experimental, as Kaiti said, how to be the synarchy, like how to actually sense our collective intelligence and get into a field that, if you're really, to your point, Reiki, about like really accessing people's genius, if you're really in a synergistic field, we've all been in them, where you're like, it's just like, you can feel the palpable difference of being connected and innervated enough to like riff and bounce and like move off each other, and like things manifest so much more fluidly there. And you can like, you know, work into edges, unpack them lightly because you're in resonance. And I think that I watch myself, especially in my professional circles, constantly deferring my knowing of field building and what I've done in council work and how powerful it is. I'm just checking my own self, that I've left that out of my professional circles in these last few years, going, oh, that's too woo. Nobody wants to talk about the field of resonance, you know? But what I'm finding is that I'm like, yeah, but things are like, honestly, they're not nearly as savvy. They're not nearly as integrated, or we're not really drawing the true capacity of the space. I'm in these awesome conversations, but I don't feel like we're like making progress. We're just sort of remixing, and they're really great professional relationships, but I don't know that we're building like capacity together. We're not building fields that can act and move in common and access our deepest wisdom to mobilize on anything. So I'm checking my own self lately, that I've left that part out of my space these last few years. And if you're inviting us to come and play and co-create with you, I feel, again, maybe it's just today's revolutionary spirit, more inspired to bring that in and center it, actually. And remember that I know what it feels like to be in fields that are really fucking on, and what gets created out of those fields. And so tending those and creating that feels really paramount to doing anything really radical together. Otherwise, I just think we'll be recreating unintentionally. That's all. Yeah, Reiki, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm gonna remix just to give a different, say the same thing in with a different map. But I think it's the process of evolution. You know, we're the first single cells aware and consciously choosing to become multicellular, to become more complex. Are the cells that make up our body conscious of the fact that they are individuated cells having a greater experience with a completely different paradigm of understanding? I don't know, maybe. But that's kind of what we're doing with groups, is we're coming together as individuated cells, saying that we understand there's a capacity for us to act at a completely different paradigm of potential if we come together and we collaborate and we become part of this meta-human. And that's what I think each one of these individuated, you know, pods are, you know, pulling humans together to create this field of this new potential that's a completely different organism when we all come together. And that's just us perpetuating the process of evolution into higher complex forms. We did the human form, now we're doing the meta-human form. It's the next order of, you know, complexity as we continue along with our evolution. So that's kind of the underwriting driver of what I think we're doing and what we're building the tools for. So we're building a nervous system. What does it actually look like? Well, maybe it's built on the blockchain and that's how we deliver information. And this is our nervous system of our meta-humans that we're creating, you know, or maybe it's built somewhere else, who knows. But so that when we step into that space and then start creating tools from there, That's kind of what I'm wanting us to do. And it sounds like this is what you guys have been doing, which is why we're having this conversation, obviously, because the field is also an attractor, call it, electromagnetic pull or whatever. But it's actually, once you step in that field, it attracts the other pieces of that field that it needs in order to manifest higher levels of complexity. So that's what we feel, that's, synchronicities. When we are tapping and flowing, we think things are just happening. It's actually an electromagnetic principle that this field of potential that's forming is attracting all the pieces that it needs in order to realize itself. Yes. So it's kind of going through this birth process. So that's the field that if we all step into, then it allows us to just form, and then we can just become part of this forming process. And then to get really practical about what does that forming process looks like. How do we support that forming process? What tools are going to help make it easier? And that's what I think us coming together in person with a group of people with this explicit purpose to go through this process could be incredibly powerful. It's kind of like a portal to a new paradigm, if you will. And then it's, consciously then building these portals and then training others how to build these portals. And then that's where our tools are kind of come into play. So that's, what I'm seeing right now is, and once this came clear, and it seems the same for you, then I'm like, well, nothing else really matters until this part. So, okay. So I've kind of like resigned myself to being happy, being in this like in-between void of what's currently right now until that actually starts, because, a lot of actions in this space almost just seem futile. And also I'm about to be a dad, and it's nice timing. So I want to pause there because that's my invitation for both of you, this is what I would love to do with you both. All the tools and different things that we've all been weaving kind of like seem like they culminate here. And yeah, I'll pause there. Okay, so question for response. Do you agree?
Costs are good, right? This is the liminal. It's the listening. It's good. I guess I'm curious about if you feel like the people you've attracted, my sense only being on one call was that there's some land-based groups who are both and Sydney asked the question, are both hoping to be potentially one of the first sort of 12 experimental land centers, and also some people who are just there because of the systems architecture, and some people who are there for both. And I wonder about, like, you're kind of in motion. I feel like it's double dutch, and Katie and I are like, okay, there's something in motion, like kind of like feeling our way into like jumping into something in motion. So I do get curious about if you feel like what we've just talked about today is sort of something that the rest of the group, and what's the right level? Is it the group like who was on the call yesterday? Is it the architects who are sort of counseling to form the kind of process, I'll put it that way, and pattern that then sort of we play out with the different, like, it's like who and how do you feel about if there was some sort of like slight shift in maybe how things operate, to be like, okay, here's what we're thinking, and sort of bring in some sort of process to kind of build foundation. How do you feel? Like, who have you been working with, the leadership you already have, how to best integrate that, what's the right way, right timing, there's all of that. I'm curious about sort of like taking what we chatted about and knowing how best to sort of right fit anything Katie and I might offer to what you already have in motion in a way that's like really collaborative and co-creative. Yeah, I would love some insight, I guess.
Yeah, dumbing right down into the deep end. I catalyzed this, and the catalyzing energy I embedded into the heart of the DNA of this space was one of radical co-creation and empowering leadership, because everyone here is leaders. And everyone's got their own gift that they are really, really great at bringing anyway. And it's all about just helping empower them bringing in that gift. I say that because both of your gifts are in holding space and creating containers and really ground in that feminine energy, not female, but feminine energy, to take in capacity, potential, which there's a lot of in this space, and hold it in a way that it makes meaning and does something effective with. So I wasn't hoping, because this is just an emergent and it's coming together. I'm reverse hoping that you would step in and actually hold that space and be like, yes, awesome. Because I know how aligned with this Renaissance you both are, that I would feel so lovely and comfortable even stepping into your field and passing off the field and letting, well, we're all creating the field at the same time, but you get what I'm saying. So I'm fully open with that. The group, do they get this? Yes. Are there villages that could be the home for this emergence that we're talking about now? Yes, as well. Already in the capacity that's kind of sitting there in that potential. So part of the reason why we're having these conversations and recording them is because we're bringing more and more information and awareness into the space and seeing as a, what emerges as we're guiding it that way, with the goal of being just, again, always attached to what's wanting to emerge and our highest purpose of what we're doing here, and then have dialogue about that and let that dialogue guide what we're all doing together. So I'd say like everyone that I've talked to seems to be on the same page that we're evolving quickly. What we're seeing this space being is quickly changing. I don't think anyone's opinions on it is anything very stagnant or solid. And that what we talked about today probably aligns with the majority of the people there right now, where they're just like, yes, they would love to be part of that 144. They're in a place in their lives where they could be, and they're wanting this. So that's kind of in a shared energy field so far. So, what I'm sharing right now isn't something that I came into this with the intention of. It was me just doing that next step, feeling into it, and this is what's emerging. So, and my role has really just been to try to like see that emergence, give a name to it, articulate it, map it out, talk about different pathways that we can go together, express a few of them. So like, yeah, the NFT thing's happening because that was some energy that was there. I've been personally trying to weave it to be not just, fixating on a tool that got a lot of hype, but instead seeing how does this really actually serve us, and bringing the conversation back to that. So that is the catalyzing energy is, how do we best serve the Renaissance and, having that be the core, Renaissance being this transition to new civilizations, and seeing what kind of conversation emerges as we hold that space and keep, progressing down a path. And things are moving really quickly. So it's, that re-emergence started at the beginning of the year.
What did you have? Yeah, I was going to say, what did you have slated for your next session or two? Just curious, what trajectory were you already on?
So have you guys gone back and watched any of the recordings?
I haven't had a chance to yet.
It's not a good pattern. It seems like it's a good pattern, but no one does it. But anyway.
We're just on 11 hours of call of video today.
Yeah, but here's my assumption is if we can get over that belief, we could save so much, because if those 11 hours were effectively spent anyway, and if the calls were well facilitated, I believe they were, then that 11 hours is going to save us hundreds of hours down the line of coordination costs. So it seems like it's an upfront cost that's not worth taking, but I would suggest otherwise, because then you get a full fill of who everyone is, what's been discussed, what's the current energy, and then you're getting caught right up into the field of where it's at. So it's almost kind of non-negotiable, I think, unless someone comes up with something better, but this is the best thing I've seen.
I wonder if there's a way to sort of transcribe so it can be more digestible more quickly.
It's not the same because you both know it's the field. It's what's being
that's true.
That there's so much being communicated, just sitting in that dialogue and feeling it, that, trying to simplify it, that's just some old paradigm stuff of how do we be more efficient? It's it's not. There's only one way to do this, How do we get more efficient at lovemaking? Why the hell are we even asking that question, So I think it's kind of the same thing. If we're holding a nice field that's comfortable to be in, and I believe all the calls have been, most people say they were their highlight, they got energized by them. And that's how I believe dialogue could be. These group conversations, we don't need to be leaving them feeling drained and, sucked of life. That's a product of our old civilization. The future and in the present for a lot of people, these dialogues are life-giving. They're enjoyable. We get off of them feeling a little more energy, and it's like a medicine to listen to. So I think there's a potential here that we can create, medicine as dialogue and have that be the conversations of all these gatherings so that people can go through this process, get healed, get caught up, understand where the field of energy is currently. And it's what's alive right now that we're trying. Anyway, I say all of that because the latest thing we're on right now is getting more practical about the structure. What's the decision-making structure? How do we decide? What's our basic governance and economic structure for bringing in new value? What does that look like? So we talked about a basics on governance. What does that actually look like? Who's holding a voice? How do they get that voice? And a basic structure that if we do take in money from institutional investors, what does that look like? So it's kind of, so in real short form, I can explain it. I'll have to show it. It's only do you want me to tell you about the structure? Or are you just more interested in knowing kind of where we're at?
I mean, ultimately all of the above. I think it'd be good for Kaiti and I to sense some of the gifts we bring and kind of our processes and approaches, and look a little through what you've got, to not be assumptive, redundant, or ill-informed, but to be thoughtful about maybe holding a session that we lead and we take it to support the continuation. I think our intent would be also to just support this foundation building, and maybe bring in an element that just simply complements what's already been in motion, but brings another layer, or 3 or 5 or however many we want to bring. But I feel like I need a minute to kind of like, I want to look through your structures a little bit more thoughtfully. I want to like sense what's in motion and know how to be a good complementary agent with anything maybe Kaiti and I might bring. And I don't know, if you're meeting weekly, I don't know if it's like next week or the week after. I would like some time to think about with you, Kaiti, like what would be really highly valuable that the two of us could bring, and then keep integrating into other different, people's offerings as well. I don't feel like we need to lead multiple sessions, but maybe a session or maybe 2 or something of a process that gets some of that foundation alignment even more like palpable, juicy, and surface. Because I have no doubt you're doing foundational work and the structures and systems are incredibly important. I just wonder how we could bring a quality to that maybe brings even more richness to that process of like the economic structures, the decision-making structures, the social structures, the cultural structures.
You're in flow.
I kind of like kick it in after this conversation and be like, okay, what's the right leverage? Like, how do we best support and integrate and all of that?
So I'm gonna reflect back flow if you guys just want to go full speed. Here's an invitation to come in, do the first one next week. So on Tuesday, 6 days from now, and another one following that, with the intention of March 20th on the equinox is when we're birthing it. So that's when we are officially setting up and forming it, meaning we've agreed on the structure, we understand it, and we have a call where we literally all come together. The founding members are all going to be on that call, and we're all going to say aye or not, and form the official structure. So we'll have our founding call, right? And then from that point, we can take it and codify it into a DAO and all that stuff if we want, and we will. So that was our current plan, is that we were going to have that done. There wasn't a fixed process for doing that. I felt like it was just going to emerge, and here it is. So now it's emerging. So if you want to jump right into this emergence, there's a space for you. Then I felt this was going to come, and here it is coming. So yes, I would love to work with you guys right now if you're wanting to kind of dive right into this and being part of the foundation and setting it up. So there's a capacity there, there's a desire for it, there's an opening for it, the energy is right for it, and it almost seems like a perfect fit.
Cool. Well, I love that we get to be experimental. It's something Kaiti and I, in some of our groups we've been convening, have been like, we want to start prototyping and experimenting, and like this seems like a really great invitation to experiment, and it connects to things that we're already sort of looking at and designing and moving on. And it's, in some ways, it's kind of cool that it's a completely different group of people, because I think it creates a lot of openness. And then how could we bridge it and link it with like where we've been having like the governance conversation? I'm thinking about Kaiti and some of these other sort of efforts around metrics and kind of, economics. And we've been doing this kind of like, for several months, honestly, since way last year. We've been like kind of like going, it's time to get experimental and like try things. And in some ways, because we're not entirely holding the whole thing, this, for me, I'll say, feels liberating, of a place we can like like be additive to, but not completely hold entirely like we are with some of our other efforts and circles, that lets us have some agility to be experimental and learn together with other people willing to experiment. And that feels really, right now, it just feels like, yes, I want to, it feels tactile. And I do want to experiment. And I appreciate that. I think you guys can, I think we can traction hack quickly, but also do it from a way that has some spaciousness. And so I would love to have a chance to chat with Kaiti after this, think about kind of like sense where you guys are, think about some things that we think would serve that foundational process, which I think will be ongoing, but enough to feel like by the equinox, like there's been a good efforting to at least put some, culture, social, structural, foundation in whatever part we can inoculate of ours into what you have going feels great. And then just kind of go. I do feel very experimental about it, which is kind of nice. I don't feel like this, like it has to become something. I just feel like the process feels really juicy to be in right now, and to kind of like test and try and experiment and learn and like iterate. And then how that informs things we are designing, and hopefully informs things other people are designing too, being kind of like in a container for that. So that's where I'm at with it. I think I want to just chat with Kaiti and see like our timing and bandwidth and right approach and what would we bring and how do we do it. And maybe we could get back with you. But Kaiti, do you have any thoughts about kind of after today, like where you sit with it?
I mean, I'm really excited. And the second we saw the model for how this was taking form, we're all kind of tapping into that same pattern. And the pattern that we've been sort of, just sort of starting to hold some pieces of the emergence of is this kind of many to many, where we've been really challenging ourselves to look at what does it really mean to embody that many to many? What does it mean to embody holding one another? Like each sort of really, really holding each other in that true sort of mutual reciprocity, where we're able to weave together all of these containers that are each kind of empowering each of the others to be their greatest whole within this greater whole. And I think this is a phenomenal opportunity to be able to model that. And if we give ourselves sort of the full permission to be fully kind of experimental and generous in weaving that model, then I think there are also some immediate kind of leverage points within some of the convening we've already been doing and some on the ground projects that we've been weaving as well. And I'm really curious and excited about what kind of an exponentiating between those could look like.
Well, so just again, full-bodied yes to everything you both are saying and building on it. So what I'm seeing is the potential of this space is there's a desire for better collaboration. There's a lot of us that want to do it. We just aren't figuring it out yet. And there's also a desire to channel funds for system change. So institutions, and there's a lot of money out there wanting to fund and finance actual change. But there's not really a way of doing that. So there's kind of both of those things that were at the start of this is one, how do we collaborate more effectively? And then two, how do we create a container to capture this energy that wants to change systems? Yes, it was a little hyper fixated on the money component, but that's when we quickly, through this emergent process, realized actually we could do crowd pooling. Let's find a way to very tangibly track all the human people out there that want to be part of this. That's a lot of potential. All the land that's available already for systems change. That's a lot of potential, etc. So it's another, that came so quickly with this emergence already. It's a way of thinking beyond of just looking at money and how to channel that, but how do we channel all the other energy? So that's kind of the driving narrative here. So if we're successful at doing that, then we do weave in all the other impulses that we're working on. Because I have that same desire. A lot of us systems change makers that are focused on this have that desire because we have too many threads and they feel disconnected. But that's how all organisms are birthed. The legs of a baby in a womb are useless in the womb. And so is the digestive system. There's all these systems that make no sense. inside a womb. Why do we have lungs? There's no air to breathe, you know, and that's kind of how I think a lot of us has been feeling with our projects. I'm projecting a lot because this is me in another conversations where it's like, it's there, or, you know, I know lungs make sense in some context, but it's just not connected. So that's the other drive of this space, is to actually connect it and make the systems make sense, and then to use that very tangibly for change, i.e. on the ground projects that are doing regeneration. How do we help them, you know, and then help them help us, meaning setting up these villages. So that's kind of giving you the whole rundown, I think, of the deepest kind of narrative of what this space is holding, in order to give you that kind of, I guess, superficial understanding, but I understand you probably have a much deeper one because this is the work you've been doing anyway. Hence why, again, I think this is a good fit. So anyway, that was just me saying, once again, I think it'd be really lovely to do this with you both.
I think it'd be kind of cool too, because I'm all about the communities movement, the boots on the ground, the actual village building, and the like connection of these places, both individual eco villages. But I will say, Katie and I also have our eye on supporting bioregional prototypes, and the idea of the multiplicity of not only a village, but a community of communities starting to sort of transform and steward systems of place and watersheds, and like the many valleys that start connecting. Like, so yes, to the individual villages. And I know that I also will be a proponent of looking for opportunities to support like a collective of villages, that then you can start to sort of model that next sort of scale of community, and what's possible. And the other thing I think is really important, that's interesting coming from me, but that I think that we can and should, I think we need to bring it to the ground. So starting there, but mirroring then digital community building and the village of the digital community space, because we're this innovative global village, that there's something about, I don't want to also stay in the high tech realm that doesn't fucking touch the earth and start making changes on the ground. That is not at all what I'm promoting. I just mean, as we start to do that, build it back up to match the digital communities, because that's the direction we're heading, whether I personally like it or not. And so I want to be a good ally and steward of digital community spaces as village, and pattern matching what we do on the ground to how we start also modeling that in digital spaces, which is right now a real disconnect, even with Zoom, even like there's just so much that's not pattern matching the depth of community interdependence that happens when you're working on the ground.
Yeah.
That I'd love to see start being mirrored in the digital community space. Yeah, go ahead.
To add in a layer on that, this touches on a conversation I was having the other day around, you know, and in addition, I could kind of wax all day about some of my concerns around like Web3 and disembodiment, and, you know, but fundamentally, if we look at technology as this accessory, this tool to then re-ground, rather than something that's like something as an accessory, an augmentation of our experience in the land, rather than something that removes us from it. I think that we're at a really essential point to design in that direction before it kind of runs away from us, because I think we're at great risk of instead designing in a way that separates. And, you know, fundamentally, if you look at like the theory of organ projection, it's a funny example, but, you know, the hammer is just an extension of the human arm, right? Any tool we've built in history is just sort of us kind of replicating within our exterior worlds, our internal worlds. And sort of as we continue to do that, just sort of inviting an inquiry about prototypes or experiments that we can start to run, where we're not using technology as sort of this escape pod, but rather as a tool that drives folks back to the ground, that actually frees up their time and their capacity so that they can spend more time in the soil.
Yeah, that's been designing. Yes, thank you for articulating that so well. And I want to just further articulate on that. And one, I had a vision where a lot of the governance stuff that could take a lot of time and be really tedious and annoying in human form, we could do away with, and we can automate some of that to simplify. So that's where I saw there was a potential with some technology where there's some coordination efforts that we don't want to waste our time in human dealing with, For example, when we're having an assembly and it's at 2 p.m., that's biased towards people who are happy and thoughtful at 2 p.m. You know, that's not great. And it's biased towards people who might be the loudest. And there's all these, you know, social situations that you could set up. But at the end of the day, not everyone wants to share at 2 p.m. But if we're sharing in a digital forum, right, then you can be up at 3 if that's when you're most thoughtful and creative and make sure that your voice is being heard. So it makes sense in some context to move some behaviors of coordination into the digital realm. And I think there's space for that. The second thing is it helps, you know, teleport learning. So this is why I called it a nervous system, but it's more like the mycelial network of a forest, where if one tree comes up with some into the evolutionary adaptation that was beneficial, and that's across the board, they could send that understanding through the mycelial network to other trees so they can also adopt that behavior. So whether it's just how to push back a parasite or whatever, there's a million different things that go on. So that's also what I see of Web3 with our coordination tools, is one community found out this coordination protocol that really worked for them. Good, now that's an application that could be duplicated across any community instantaneously, right? So then we're just amplifying our evolutionary potential with this technology. But that's if we are designing the technology to serve us and our needs on the ground and how it affects what we're trying to accomplish, rather than just perpetuating technology from the old paradigm, which is what we're doing. That's a lot of Web3 is doing that. It's just Wall Street 2.0 on the blockchain. We're making new forms of derivatives and it's all about speculation and staring at graphs. It's like, we don't need to do that. But the technology potential there is for us to use as new coordination tools. So I think what you're hitting on is fantastic and we need to be aware of it. But then I also think it just builds right back to everything we've been saying so far, which is the need to kind of really get practical and build from those spaces. Yeah. So yeah. It's great how aligned we are. I think that's what the focus of this call was I think I just saw all of us doing it, just seeing how deep we can go on our beliefs and seeing like if there's a coherence there. I went as deep as I felt I needed to go, and you guys were reflecting back the most beautiful, incredible visions. So I'm yes to being in the field that you guys are holding and creating. So I was that way anyway, which is how I found myself in your guys' spaces and some of the places you're holding, which you do so well. So anyway, this is just honoring that and saying thank you. And I'm feeling satisfied with everything I want to say.
I'm honored to get to keep exploring. And I think we ought to catch up on those videos so that we can understand a little bit more around that field that's been building. And then, you know, looking forward to further ideating on how this can all emerge.
Yeah, I appreciate the invitation. Yeah, I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to get experimental. Definitely appreciating the resonance and alignment. And so now I'm excited to like play with it, like embody it. So appreciating sort of, I guess, the permission and the invitation. I think that sometimes that helps. I don't really feel like asserting myself into many spaces these days, but I do feel like showing up where it feels aligned and resonant and invited and like going, okay, like I'm trying to follow the law of serendipity and synchronicity right now. And yeah, even just the title Regenerative Civics, I was like, ooh, yes. So I'm excited to kind of learn more, and like maybe Katie and I can digest this a bit and then come back with something that we can offer into the space. And thank you for the opportunity, for your vision, your weaving.
Our vision.
And also just our vision. I just want to also plus circular leadership, not only because it's a pattern I believe in and I think makes us stronger and wiser collectively, but also the reality that you are about to go into fatherhood, and there's going to be a period of time of incubation where even if a lot of it's going to be on your sweetie to like be in that intimacy, it's a radical rite of passage for you too. And to know that you have built around you as a visionary, a counselship that can like, dynamically continue something because it belongs to all of us is exactly why circular leadership is so vital. So we can all go be humans and have our life and be in our rites of passage and be in times where we're going to be more removed or more centered, but that nothing stops or falls or fails because of that. It actually is held, and we can like celebrate you and hold you in a rite of passage, and that you can kind of trust things are like moving. And that your leadership is intact even as you need to step away, and you will. So I just want to celebrate that wisdom, because a lot of people try to go alone. And I love that you're like, oh no, this has to be me. So I'm just excited for you and your wife. I'm excited for you guys. It's a big moment.
Thank you. And for what it's worth, in the regenerative civilizations that we're creating, both husband and wife, both parents, whatever genders they are, all the parents, what am I saying? All the parents, however many there are to this children, get to take 3 months off should they choose to, and have that ability to really welcome in a new life. So I am fully planning on taking 3 months off surrounding the birth to sit with Cece, and it's not going to be on her shoulders. It's on our shoulders together, and we're going to welcome in a new life into the world. So
I was terrified to set down the
momentum. Say again?
I was terrified to set down the momentum that I'd built, and it was one of the most powerful recalibrations to fuel where I am now and what I feel capable of, because I just set it all down. It was hard. It wasn't an easy thing because society doesn't encourage it, because I felt like I was going to lose all of my clients, all of my work, all of my momentum. And I just knew I had to do it anyway, regardless. And I'm so much more nourished when I stepped back into things. I was changed from it and brought that into rebuilding from a very different perspective. So I just want to celebrate you taking the time that you need and knowing that you've inoculated something that can carry on and should honor the space you're going to take to bring that new life in. There's nothing more important. There's no work more important than that. So good on you. Well done.
Thank
We
you.
support you.
And that's incredibly beautiful. And just for one last point of alignment, then I already know in my deepest heart, and we'll see what actually comes up, but the point of alignment is going to be stepping into these physical villages. So that's what I'm already providing space for, is I will step away to welcome in this new life, hold that space. And then when we're ready, the next step is then physically coming together and launching these villages and holding this container for it and all of that stuff we shared at the beginning of this. So that's kind of what I'm seeing is the next steps. And that's what I'm wanting to align with both of you, because it's going to take time to plan that thing, that physical event. So I know if it's, 6 months out, we're setting the seeds for that right now. So we could start putting that in motion and aligning on what that looks like and calling in all the right people, which are already all showing up right now. So that's kind of the pattern that you guys are stepping into. I'm seeing some head nodding, so that feels nice.
So. Gear is turning around.
Yeah, I was sort of like, ooh. Well, for today, maybe we let that all integrate. Appreciate you, and I think there's a lot more to come. So I think I want to sense right fit, right alignment, right way to kind of jump in the double dutch. Jump in the double dutch.
I only have one more question and then I won't say anything else, but how old is your child?
I have two. I have an 18-year-old who left home, and I have a 4-year-old who is so cute and just getting started. Her first year at school. Yeah. I got an older one who's almost an adult, but not quite. Trying to be an adult. I'm like, well, I'm still trying to be an adult, so good luck to you. 18. And then, yeah, then 4-year-old.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, me too. They're big teachers. Yeah, I'm tempted to start spiraling, so I think I'm going to call it. Let's come back to, let's come back. There's some more on the horizon that I get very curious about. So we'll just start with the foundation building. Start with where we are.
Okay. So then an immediate next step, do you want me to send out an email for either next week or the week after that you'd want to host a session and set the space for that? Same thing with Sydney. She asked to do the NFT one that you guys stepped into. So there'll be a similar pattern to what's already happening.
Yeah, Katie, what do you think?
Yeah, I would love to get a better sense of sort of the progression of the conversation. So I think kind of tuning into some of those past recordings and then understanding a little bit more about the arc and the intent of sort of continuing that organizing pattern. And I think that'll help inform that best timing and topic and all of that.
Perfect. Then just whenever you feel inspired, if you feel inspired, send me a message and we'll go from there. Or just grab another call time. You can do either.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
That was incredible.
Yeah.
Well, next time. Cheers, y'all.
Onwards.